person.
All right, we are live and recording.
Should, oh, there you go. So if someone click. Oh, funny. Okay, I call to order this Thursday, September 8th, 2022 meeting of the Moab City Planning Commission at 6:08 p.m. In attendance, we have planning commissioners, myself, Kaya Marienfeld, Ruben Villapando Salas, and Jeremy Lynch. We also have city staff and some project applicants here with us. The first item of business is citizens to be heard. We are live in chambers this evening and we don't have anyone here. And we also did not receive any emails as far as I know about anything on or off the agenda. Next, we have approval of minutes, item 3.1, Moab City Planning Commission regular meeting minutes from, August 25th, 2022. This is a possible action on approval of these minutes. Any input from you guys?
No comment. I wasn't here, so I can't really comment.
All right, I move to approve our minutes from August 25th, 2022. Okay, I have a second from Ruben. Yeah, use your mic so people can hear you. We'll go ahead and do a roll call vote just to make it easy for our person taking notes. Jeremy?
Aye.
Ruben?
Aye.
And I vote aye as well. Next item is 4.1, a public hearing. This is on proposed ordinance 2022-14, an ordinance approving a zoning map amendment for approximately 1.5 acres of a parcel located at 1492 South Aggie Boulevard and Highway 191, Moab, Utah. What is the number behind? Is that the 0118
Parcel number.
Oh, the parcel
There's
number.
some, yeah, as we get into the complexity of this project area, for technical terms, we have to use the parcel number.
Okay,
in
great.
addition.
So the parcel number is 0100180002. It would be from general commercial zone C4 to manufactured housing residential zone, which is R4. This is a public hearing, but we will hear a bit of a summary first, then we will open the public hearing after that.
Anna, hold on a second. I'm going to bring the applicants in to observe. So we'll do a quick introduction for our applicants here as well. Move there. Jess could probably move it to the base, but I think we're going to lose some of the screens somewhere. If we drag it, it might do an auto clip to the top or base. Okay, let me introduce our project team applicants here really quick, make sure they're on. All right, good evening, Brooke and Mike. We have the public hearing presentation item here. So we brought you into the live meeting to observe during the public hearing, and then we'll move to the action item part of the discussion where we'll ask for participation.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks so much. All right, thanks, Anna. Take it away.
Okay, so this is the zoning amendment that we had spoken about last meeting for the Aggie Townhomes Phase 2, located at 1492 South Highway, Aggie Boulevard, Highway 191, which is Aggie, also Aggie Boulevard. The property owner is the state of Utah School and Institutional Trust Lands. The parcel that is being proposed is a 5-acre parcel. It's currently zoned C4 general commercial and R4 manufactured housing residential. The proposed zoning would be to have it all zoned R4 manufactured housing zoning. The proposed use again is twin homes, 12 buildings at 24 units total. The applicant Brooke Cole with GWC Capital on behalf of the state of Utah School and Institutional Trust Land submitted the city of Moab Townhome plat application on June 13, 2022 for zoning amendment. And with that, for approximately the Aggie Boulevard property that we were talking about, it is part of 2 larger parcels that total 40 acres. The Aggie, again, the section that we're looking at is the 5-acre lot for the phase 2 of the Aggie townhomes. The applicant is requesting to change 1.5 acres from C4 zoning to R4 zoning to facilitate the proposed Aggie townhome phase 2 development. And then section 1704 of the Moab Municipal Code governs the process for amending the zoning map. So here's the proposed area in green that they want to change to make it all the R4 zone. It was part of the northern parcel that they're going to combine to make it all onto one parcel here. What we use to determine whether or not we support the zoning change is looking at our USU master plan map, which is part of our general plan. And it's showing that multifamily residential is in this area is what we agreed upon when we annexed the property into the city. And so we are in support of the zoning amendment. So the current zoning for the property is C4. And then the property is currently a vacant lot that is part of a much larger proposed development for the new Utah State University campus. The property is to the northwest is currently vacant, but is proposed to be the Aggie Apartments Phase 1. So we're looking at, they're looking at doing 2 phases at once. Both of them are under review for development currently with our department. This all was annexed into the city in 2012. And then for us to be able to get this process or phase 2 completely approved, we need to have the zoning amendment approved. And then there's also a right of way that needs to be vacated. There's, we did do the preliminary plat approval at our last meeting, but we also need to have them submit a final plat for approval, and then also get the final approval for the site plan review. This is the layout of the proposed project. And then this is our matrix of what's allowed in the R4 zoning district compared to what's allowed in the C4 zoning district. As you can see, the use, it's a much less intensive use than the C4. And then what we are proposing is a motion for a positive recommendation to the City Council on ordinance 2022-14 to rezone 1.5 acres of a parcel located at 1492 South Highway 191, Aggie Boulevard, Moab, Utah, from general commercial to manufactured housing residential. And that's it.
Thank you. Nice presentation.
Will you exit share screen? It'll open us up to a gallery view.
All right.
Okay, I will open the public hearing on proposed ordinance 2022-14 at 6:17 p.m. We still do not have anyone here live in chambers. I still have not seen any comments come in through our comment portal or from email. And the only folks that we have on Zoom right now are not here to provide public comment. So if folks are comfortable, I will close the public hearing at 6:17 p.m. this evening. Okay. So we have a possible action now that the public hearing has closed. Do we have any questions for the applicant? I know we had discussed a portion of this, the early component at our last meeting, but this is the rezone part of the whole proposal. Any questions from commissioners or staff? Anything you want to add? Applicants who are on?
I don't think that from the staff perspective, we really have anything in addition other than this is a staff directed request of the project team. So as the project team was coming in with their desired project or product and layout, this was a way that we were able to coordinate the approval process within the zoning to really allow a singular project on a singular property with a singular zoning, the cleanest way to get it done. So that's what we're just needing to do to get everything else on board.
I think that makes sense. Well, great. With that said, we can entertain a motion. If anyone would like to make them, as always, they are in the agenda summary on your packet. There's a recommended motion to forward a positive recommendation to City Council on this, if anyone would like to make that.
I'd like to make a motion, a positive recommendation without modifications.
Correct.
With and without?
So with or without modifications is as it reads. Is that correct?
Yeah, so that's the option. You can make a positive recommendation with or without modification. So
okay.
without, it would just be reading the motion that's below the options there.
It didn't seem like there were any other necessary modifications, so positive recommendation without modifications is my motion.
Will you read the motion, the full, I move to forward a positive
course.
recommendation?
Motion for positive recommendation. I move to forward a positive recommendation to the City Council on ordinance 2022-14 to rezone 1.5 acres of a parcel located at 1492 South Highway 191, Aggie Boulevard, Moab, Utah, parcel number 01-0018-0002 from general commercial C4 to manufactured housing residential R4.
Okay, great. We have a positive recommendation motion from Jeremy. Any discussion? Or excuse me, second?
Second.
And a second from Ruben. Any discussion before we take a vote?
I'm fine.
All right. We'll do a roll call vote. Jeremy?
Aye.
Ruben?
Aye.
And I vote aye as well. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, staff, for the wonderful presentation. Great.
Thank you,
Thank you,
applicants.
applicants.
We'll let you
We'll
go and
let you
talk to
go
you
and
soon.
talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, folks. All right. I did not introduce that item properly. It should have been 5.1, which is our action item, is distinct from the public hearing. Just want to correct the record there. Next is a discussion item, back discussing outdoor lighting code amendments. This is a briefing and discussion.
Would you like to be brought back in?
There's some
Here's some
feedback.
feedback, which is weird.
Echo.
Yeah, Richard.
Yeah, Richard, why don't you come on?
Is
Is
your
your
volume on?
volume on?
I
Interesting.
think it's you. You're not muted on Zoom.
Council chambers.
Oh, me.
Oh, me.
How about that? I'm the
Hey!
I'm the awkward one. All
It's only
right.
been 2.5 years, Corey. We said, no, I'm just kidding.
I'm not taking yourself off mute. All right. Well, I apologize, everybody. Thanks for pointing that out. Richard's computer was not letting him access the material, so I'm going to share screen from my computer, but we are going to have Richard present.
Great. And when you present, you might just introduce yourself again if people didn't see the last meeting. I want to know who you are. So
Yep. Whenever you're ready, Richard.
Well, I am Richard Laurie, the AmeriCorps Vista and Sustainability Department. My role is about to change, but we'll go with that for right now. The first thing you'll notice that has changed is a different format. It's because Corey and I decided, we're not editing the ordinance, we're editing municipal code, so we changed the format up a bit. Most of it's still the same, but there's some items that we discussed last time that we'll touch on today. Corey, did you go down to the next highlight section?
Richard, would you mind moving your mic a little bit closer? I just want to make sure people on YouTube can hear. Thank you.
And as Richard had pointed out, this is our pre-draft ordinance formatting. So you're going to see these breakup of sections. And we can make amendments to that, but this will be coming before you in the next edition in a full ordinance proposal.
Great.
All right, so the first discussion point is referring to the lighting hours. In the original text, we allow for all commercial establishments to have lighting on until 10 p.m. or business close, but that's regardless of when they actually close. So a business could close at 5 p.m. and have lights on until 10 p.m. So what we brought up in the last meeting was changing it so that all commercial establishments shall turn off outdoor lighting 1 hour after business close. And then what Jessica, the commission member, brought up is allowing for more heavy commercial uses, zones to keep that 10 p.m. or business close clause. So I just changed up the wording to allow for C3, C4, and RC zones, which are the heaviest commercial uses, if that's the correct way to put it. They can keep on, no matter when their business hours ends, they can keep their lighting on until 10 p.m. or business close if it's late. If you go down a little bit, this also will apply to illuminated signage. So within C3, C4, and RC, all illuminated signage can be on until 10 p.m. or business close. But if you're outside of those zones, then your signage should be off 1 hour after business close.
Other questions about the zoning that's not acknowledged here? Because obviously the C3, C4, and RC, but the other zones that are by default not included here. Are there questions about that at all? Or are we all pretty comfortable?
No, I think that makes sense. I think there's a lot of understanding built into how it's written where it's, it's not saying you can't have lights on when your business is open or when people are likely to see your business in a manner that would advertise it, which I think is the point of leaving it on in those heavier commercial zones. So
Right.
people who are walking around after eating at the restaurant for dinner can see where maybe the place they want to eat breakfast next morning is.
Right.
So,
Right.
and of course, hotels, it doesn't really apply because they're always open.
Yeah.
Right.
Unfortunately, those are some of the biggest lit places in town.
Mhm.
All right. So the next highlight. Let's see. So we had a discussion about allowing for ground mounted lighting for federal and state flags. Currently, in the current lighting code, we have it stated that it must be provided that the light is top down and narrow beamed. We wanted to allow for ground mounted lighting, we could just remove that requirement. I know that Kaya, you weren't too in favor of that, but
I understand it. I understand that it's a carve out, that certainly makes sense traditionally. So
We're comfortable from a staff level, as
Mhm.
long as the commission is comfortable with this, of advancing a recommendation when we do get the official draft ordinance that has an open discretion to the council saying, as planning commission, we see both points.
Yep.
We're offering this question to them.
Yeah.
Versus a solidified.
Yeah.
So if you'd like to remain solidified of yes, uplighting or no uplighting,
Yeah.
we can do either of those or the mixed, but.
yeah, and I think Luke was at that meeting, so he'll be able to
Mhm.
translate that. I think that discussion to
Mhm.
to the rest of the council.
So for now, we're still feeling mixed is how we want to propose this. Okay,
Great.
I think that's appropriate.
Have you guys driven by the school or any other light posts to see? Because I drove by, I live near HMK, so I was looking at that like, pole and
Mhm.
it's not terrible, actually.
Yeah,
Not,
and I think-
like nearly as far as you could imagine it, especially when going over code.
I think if like every single business in town had an upward lit flag, we might be having a different discussion because the whole ordinance would kind of be null at that point. But
Right.
I think it's an important thing to allow for, and I think it's a minimal impact, at least how it is now. And people are gonna hear that and everyone's gonna get an upward lit flag probably, but
Right.
Is there any indication or wording around the sizing of flag? Because flag sizes tend to vary. And I know
Oh,
around
that's an
here, they're
interesting
reasonable
point.
size, but you go up to Salt Lake and these things can be
It's a great
the
point.
size of a hotel themselves,
That's true.
which to be lit would be very different, but I don't
Yeah.
expect that here, but maybe that's just a future consideration.
Hopefully we don't get an RV world.
where I'm
Yeah.
from, it was the Freedom gas station in the upper Midwest that had, like, I kid you not, a flag that was larger than the building.
It happens. Yep.
You could always see it if you were running out of gas, though. I will say it was easy to be like, oh, there's a gas station.
Good, we're good.
We'll have to see what a municipal jurisdiction's authority would be on something like that.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Given there's federal components,
of
obviously.
course, of course.
Sure.
If it's a don't tread on me flag, I think we could regulate that to a different degree than
Yeah.
a state or federal flag.
I'm very comfortable with how this is written.
Okay.
I bet council will agree as well.
Okay.
That sounds good.
Yeah, that's not, but prior to that discussion last time, that's not something I had thought about.
It's just we see a lot of input that those top down lights kind of they don't light a flag particularly
Mhm.
well. Is
Yeah.
what we've heard. So
We can get rid of the total output exemption and make people choose between having it flagged lit or something else.
Interesting. And that was kind of when we're discussing how to, I think, work this into a carrot cookie situation is the kind of the national designation that it must be lit.
Mm.
And so that's kind of where we're like, well, we're kind of backed into a corner there where if
Well,
they're going to have a flag, we have to allow it to be lit
I don't want any
Unless
more
they
LTs
take it
about
down.
flags. in the
unless they take
paper.
it down. That's true.
that's actually an
That's true.
interesting point because yeah, if they don't want to have it count towards store light output, then they take it down.
They
at
take
night.
the flag down.
Yeah.
But most people are gonna designate lighting for a flag.
We
But-
could look at incorporating something like that.
Cool.
Yeah, we could look into that.
Alright, so on to the next one. It's kind of on the same topic. So in the original wording for, now this is in sign code, this is 17.93075, I think. And so in the original wording, we allow for ground mounted lighting for freestanding monument style signs. And we are considering removing that exemption so that all signs must be illuminated from the top.
I like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Of course, and we even talked about it last time, there's not a lot of ground mounted totems around, so.
Yeah.
Right.
I think like one of the big issues that Corey brought up was billboards a bit outside of town that they have a upward facing light and
Mhm.
that causes a big
Yep.
glare.
Mhm.
But yeah, cool. And the next one, again, this is just kind of a discussion one, is 40,000 lumens per fixture for signs. I don't know if it's ever going to be an issue of a property of a lot having no outdoor lighting and putting all of their total light output into a single sign. But 40,000 lumens, because this is for externally illuminated signs, 40,000 lumens seems a bit excessive. And we haven't come up with a good number yet to replace it with.
I'll put more look into that one, but considering not voting tonight, so
Mhm.
that one I'll actually make a note of. Sunset Grill. I don't know. I don't have any more comments on that, but I know there are lights, and I think those lights are for the parking lot itself. So those are to remain on always anyways.
That is an interesting point as far as safety lighting goes. We'll have to look into the provisions outlined. I don't think there are requirements that they shall be lit all night,
Mhm.
but I also don't think that we have prohibitions on it.
Can we go back up to the lighting hours section? So I think it says that the original wording, you're allowed to have lighting on all night if it's for.
So, yeah, that would be like lighting outside a door, like an
Right.
door on a hotel or
Parking.
lot, like
Yeah,
safety
number,
lighting and parking.
number
lots, yeah.
3,
So
compliant
yeah,
parking lot and pathway lighting required for the safety of guests or customers, and that's included in what can be kept on all night.
But
Which
yeah, I mean,
Maybe
this,
that is an issue.
if the lighting is compliant up at Sunset Grill, the issue is that they're above everything else. So
Right.
it's downward facing for them, which is compliant, but it's
hmm
shining onto the rest of town.
hmm
Like shielding must be required if, light is to, pass a certain point or.
I
to
mean,
go
there's are
above a certain
issues
elevation.
about the changes for making it lighting what you're intending to light.
the
nothing-
directed illumination could factor into that to a degree, that the directed illumination cannot leave the property. So with those particular lights being so high up, I am sure that there's going to be an amount of non-directed or kind of that spill light
Oh, definitely.
that will continue to go over, but the idea is that it is mostly mitigated or at least shrouded in a way that it's trying to channel that light even better. We've, with other hotels that are a little bit more, or that's Sunset Grills, an eating establishment, but with hotels along the RC strip,
Mhm.
we've already engaged with them about those shrouds, and it's been a really effective mitigative
Oh,
effort.
that's great.
So that's something with Sunset Grill, if we ever do open up that discussion, I think could be easily mitigated to a certain degree. We're not going to eliminate, obviously, all light coming off the hill, but hopefully it wouldn't be quite the piercing light that we've gotten comments about in the past.
Yeah, yeah. And we just need like my headlamp where it has a red light. You can click the red light on
Yeah.
to not blind people when you're walking around. I can still see, you can still read my book.
And once upon a time, their road was all white light that went up. Now they use
Yeah.
red light.
Yeah.
Their bistro lights aren't bad at all, but I think
Mhm.
there are 4 or 5 actual street lights that
Mhm.
actually just blare over the town.
Right.
Yeah, particularly the walk or the Westwood Palisade neighborhood is sort of basked in
Mhm.
the
Mhm.
light of the Sunset Grill all
Right.
night.
With these provisions and then the time frame that we're approaching it at, is that the legal non-conforming status that they'll enter into is obviously not going to be an immediate termination, but it could jump into what was going to be the next section we we're going to cover, which is the special provisions section, which handles nuisance lighting, for lack of a better term.
Mhm.
I don't know if you want to jump into that right now. With the
Yeah.
language, it was kind of the last thing.
Yeah.
I think it's just this lower section.
Forgot to add in, so these section numbers that you see right now are for C1, C2, C3, and C4. They currently have the statement you see, and we'd be adding direct illumination to that statement,
Right, and then this,
and then adding it to residential zones as well.
and this is that clause that allows us that if there's truly that, I really don't know the appropriate way to term it at this point, but directed illumination that is being geared specifically off-site, that gives us authority to engage in that prior to any improvements that they're proposing.
Yep.
So what might be a typical legal non-conforming discussion, we could advance that because it would become a zoning violation at that point. So it is, I think, a really appropriate strategy to try to mitigate those, and it's a bit of a negotiation in how to mitigate those. And that's part of the definitions, is that the way Richard has helped define that is, if you can mitigate it with the existing fixture, that would be permissive. So maybe it's not fully compliant, in all senses, but if you can get it at least compliant as far as the direct illumination,
Yeah.
that can be done. So if you're over in lumen count or its temperature wise isn't correct, but you're at least going to shine it down or better directed, we'll work with you there. So for something like that, which could be a massive expense for Sunset Grill, this could be the intermediary step until they do a big revamp of the
Think something
property.
about it.
I don't think there were any other.
Yeah, that's it for, code changes or anything like that. We do have a question for y'all. Would you want to see more like diagrams or anything like representing?
You might have remembered when Richard presented once, specifically with directed illumination, there was that little house that on one side it was
Mhm.
showing non-directed and the other side. And most of the materials that we've adopted through the IDA, and there's, we have permission to use those, were the kind of blue cartoons that you're probably used to seeing in pamphlets and everything, or the cartoon style illustrations. And we're wondering if with some of these updated definitions, would it be helpful that we create some of these illustrations that are mostly consistent with that type of artwork? With our new code update, we are going to be putting in a lot, I think, more diagramming, more matrices,
Mhm.
because often those pictures really can't express 1,000 words. Within code, words are precious, so we don't want to over detail anything, where a picture could be really helpful with a purpose statement or the implied purpose of what we're trying to do. But with this draft, we didn't want to start throwing a bunch of pictures in if you feel comfortable that it speaks for itself.
Mhm. I think in the code itself, I think it speaks for itself, but certainly when you're trying to articulate what this means to the public or explain it, it's really nice to have those diagrams. So,
Perfect.
on the city's website, when someone goes
Yeah.
looking for what does this mean? Or if they're trying to check if their neighbors, like motion sensor floodlight is cool or not, that's
Mhm.
shining on their property every
Mhm.
time a skunk goes past, like that's helpful, I think.
We can do that, and that makes a lot of sense. I think we're working with our communications director for a series of ordinances that we've been working on, everything from ADUs and AH, which we've just done, and then with our new landscaping and dark sky, a pretty extensive FAQ section and informational packet outreach so that the public can have
Great.
a lot better tangible access to this information.
As far as the cartoons we do have, are those from the IDA or have you put those together?
I think some of them might be from the IDA, and some of them were taken. I think it's referenced below the picture from like from some
Mhm.
Colorado
Yeah.
municipality.
Okay. Just as far as consistency, I think it's nice because it is very nice to scroll through the code and then scroll exactly to your point because you see the picture first and then you can dive into the code of it.
Right.
So that is always helpful.
Okay. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the commission before we move on that discussion item?
I think it makes
Okay.
sense.
Alrighty. So, Kai, if you'd like, we can move on to, we do have one more discussion item, which is that landscaping framework.
Yes. Our next item is 6.2, our second discussion item, proposed landscaping standards code framework. Briefing and discussion.
I'm going to share screen here with a working document, which is why it was not published in the packet, but enough that we can present on that the planning staff here tonight specifically has been working on formatting where we're going to go with this landscaping draft. So you're obviously going to see a lot of color on here. The black original text is really kind of basic framework that was established to direct how we're going to approach the system of this landscaping ordinance. And then all of the highlights is really the filling in or content improvements that we're looking through. So I'm not trying to, I think, dive too much, obviously at this very quick pace through the details of this, but certainly work through the framework and idea and make sure it is consistent with the direction that the Planning Commission gave to our consulting agents, the Water Resource Group and Water Now. Water Western Resource Advocates. That's who.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. So obviously within the whereas clauses, we're building up our findings of facts. What is really the generation or need for us to establish? What is this landscaping standards update, as well as bringing in the idea of water conservation to a significant degree into this? Why I'm mentioning this now is that as we've been dealing with details, there are multiple purposes for a municipality regulating and development standards for landscaping beyond water conservation. So it isn't just to reduce water use, but it is also to promote landscaping being done in an efficient, sustainable way. And this is where we've found maybe not what I'd consider conflict or friction, but sometimes these opposing ideas can come up of where we are now requiring green space, which obviously goes against the idea of reducing water use. Both of these are important ideas. So I think it's the planning commission's role as we get eventually into the content of this to determine what most appropriately matches the general plan's directive to this body to establish. And it can be a little bit of a fine line that we'll have to balance here. As we were going through this as well, there are 3 additional components to landscaping that we've been unable to detangle or untether from this discussion, which is buffering and screening in addition to landscaping. So screening obviously being the furthest removed, screening can be done without landscaping, but buffering by code incorporates landscaping. So how buffering is utilized, defined, and then with content required, meaning what type of landscaping and how it's landscaped, has a play into the screening component as well. How effective is it at its job, which is to buffer or mitigate against adjacent uses? This really will deserve its own full meeting. We've tried to dissect it within the staff and then with our consultants as well. And it really is an overwhelming distinction. So we'll get into that a little bit later. Maybe at the end of this conversation, we can break out the idea of promoting kind of this arithmetic matrix of how your scale of intensities of uses will contribute to different scales of buffering, because at this time, it's really interpretive. It literally will say that the zoning administrator shall determine based on what their review of the differing uses is how intense they believe the buffering ought to be, which gives us a lot of authority, but it's not particularly clear for developers. Getting back to framework, we have a number of added definitions that will need to go into the Title 17 code. Some of these do exist, but will have to be reworked. Landscaping in particular, at its root, is something we not only need to pop the hood on, but as I've kind of joked, is we need to blow the hood off this thing and really rebuild it. Because as of now, I think it works, but if we're to promote landscaping as it's being promoted here, it's going to take a little bit of intentional language to give us that authority. Another definition that we'll want to talk about as we get to the base or kind of to the bottom end of this ordinance is the idea of personal agricultural cultivation. We'll just bring it up now to the idea of local residents being the primary utilizers of this idea, cultivating products and how we want to define what that scope of products is, whether it's purely food products, are flowers or other herb type plants included in that, to what length we want to go of allowing people to be self-sufficient. I think that's a essential property right we are certainly not trying to eliminate, but to what scope can we allow that as an exemption? So we'll kind of put a pin in that and come back to that excuse me, later in the conversation.
As a big cultivator personally of a significant number of flowers, I support adding flowers to that.
And that's one of those perspectives that we need to hear.
Yeah.
I think on staff, we have cultivators that are, very product-based or food-based. But how do, there's a certain sense of quality of life that we have to protect here as well, even if it isn't tangibly,
Yeah.
you know, substantial.
Yes.
Um,
All the bees are living in my yard.
There you go.
so That pollinate
we do
your
need to save
tomatoes.
the bees. Um,
They're fat and happy.
So we're scrolling down here. There is this section 2 is purely dedicated to screening buffering. Enough said, there's a lot of color on there that we're going to need to revisit at some point. Getting down now into the chapter, which will be landscaping standards. It's going to be, sorry, that is pretty small. I'll try
Yeah,
to
it's
zoom
okay.
in for those viewing on YouTube. So it's visible. Okay. Kind of our more typical standard of a chapter. So it'll include a purpose statement, scope, and applicability. The way we're hoping to structure this is by incorporating a general standard section, which is what we're coordinating with those consultants of the elements that we're trying to require or regulate. And then once we define out those elements, so currently listed as turf limit, plant list, hydrozones, water budget, irrigation, there's water features added here, which is a staff edit, but I think we ought to continue to maintain that. Within those were all presented, and amongst others, living plant materials was another that was presented to the Water Board, Planning Commission, and City Council that was decidedly not included on their directive, but it's something at a staff level we're wanting to kind of maintain in the back of our minds of, do we need to include this to advance? Again, like I said at the very beginning, part of the general plan's need for, and these are words in those purpose statements that we don't try to promote, but a pleasant and attractive atmosphere within our community. We're regulators, so that's not a great type of vocabulary. We like to kind of use more black and white language, but that was the approved directive of landscaping. So we need to make sure that we're balancing. Are we effectively doing that by removing any requirements for living plant materials? This section we're getting into now, submittal requirements. This is really my bread and butter area that I dwell in mostly, which is how do we approve those things? And the tool that we're developing is that, similar to AEH, we're going to use the existing framework of approval. So if you're going in for a building permit, that's the land use authority of which will review that level. So it could be a staff level approval, planning commission approval, or city council approval based on what type of development that you're looking at. The mechanism of review will be a landscaping plan, which either could be broken into landscaping plan and irrigation plan, or it would be a single bodied plan, but those elements obviously represented there. These criteria are going to be then applied on top of those existing parameters that we already have in our PUD, PAD, MPD, or what we found was our large scale developments over 30,000 square feet, which already has a super specific landscaping requirement area. But the meaning of that is that we're not trying to rewrite the book for the PAD, which already, it took a lot of time for the City Council Planning Commission to define out what the PAD requirements are. We're just saying where these different processes require landscaping, that landscaping will need to require or be compliant with these provisions. So we're not, to a major degree, redirecting where landscaping ought to be, but we're saying the landscaping that we do require needs to be water efficient and compliant within this new chapter, if that makes sense. So it's almost a lens that's being applied to existing landscaping areas and landscaping required spaces. Into the review procedures, there's a bit more drawn out explanation of what that landscaping plan would need to include, as well as what the irrigation design plan would need to include. What we're trying to balance here, based on the levels, is the obvious approachability for different scale developments. If you're a property owner and you just want to do a revamp of your landscaping, we don't want to make it so cumbersome that you have to go out and hire a landscape architect just to help you design some of your irrigation. Yet, if you're a hotel or a large scale commercial development, you're obviously into that category of where that is not an overexertion of your budget, and it's a super critical part of our approval. So that will be a requirement, is that you have a certified design specialist. It doesn't have to be a landscape architect per se. Water Now, or I should just say our consultants are diving into where and how those certifications will be applied at these different levels. But the nature of this and what we heard from all the bodies is we're not trying to go out and take away existing property owners' rights for their landscape. And we're also trying to be helpful in them redeveloping their landscaping in a compliant way. We're not placing all the burden on commercial spaces, given most of this water use is in the residential zones. If we look, most of the commercial properties are not actually using that much landscaping water or devoting that much energy or land to their landscaping. They're really trying to be as thrifty with their landscaping budget as possible. It's our private property owners in the R2 and R3 zones that are our grass lawn or more traditional home style landscaping that will be most affected by this benefit of this ordinance as far as conserving water. Scroll down a bit further here. This legal non-conforming component will be a major aspect of this. Is obviously within the public, every time we're trying to put regulatory authority onto something that is to some degree a property owner rights, we are not trying to require you to go and plant a bunch of things, spend money on things that you're not willing to plant. We're just saying where there is landscaping, it needs to be of a quality or compliance that is within this scope. If you're not wanting to touch your lawn, we're not asking you to touch it necessarily. So these tripping mechanisms will be important to, I think, property owners to understand of when they're going to need to come into compliance if their lot isn't already there. To that additional degree, this is one of those, like Richard's presentation, where we'd really like to hear some ideas right now so we can do some research about areas that would be appropriate for exemption. So we've discussed kind of the idea of a personal agricultural cultivation idea, and kind of off of that same tree, a branch would be, the permitted and approved areas for keeping limited number of fowl and livestock, how that works within the landscape, and then approved agricultural uses that already exist. So what other areas the commission might think we need to preserve and protect because they are an above calling to what we're trying to do as far as water efficient conversion of landscaping.
With permitted fowl for food production, would that be like automated watering systems for?
It's a little bit, it's less about water in this regard. It's almost more about landscaped area or area being used for a certain purpose that is, so in your yard per se, there's a certain percentage of that yard that has to be dedicated to landscaping.
Yeah.
Of that, a enclosure for chickens.
Yeah.
Can be included in that landscaping.
But
So we're
that does not
saying,
count against my bare earth component because that is super bare earth in the chicken area.
right, that's right, because they
Yeah.
eat all the seeds.
Ain't never growing anything there.
That's right.
Yep.
That's right.
Okay, that makes sense. I'm just gonna be the test case for this.
Yes.
It's just my personal property, in case everyone. Yeah.
Yeah,
I've got chickens, I've got some grass, I've got mulch, I've got flowers and vegetables. and-
things.
Yep.
Which is what we need. We're fortunate to have kind of different perspectives on staff to have this, which is why this draft was so colorful.
Totally.
Different components that we're all passionate about preserving, and where that common ground of, okay, no, we all seem to agree that these are things that can be regulated better or improved that are not regulated.
Jeremy can bring the cat play structure component to expertise.
Be very disruptive to any landscape.
So to this end, within the existing code, this is really all I think that we found. Jess did point out earlier up in this draft a number of, I think it's way up here. There we go. Other areas that we might evaluate.
I'm actually super curious how this would compare and contrast to Mulberry Grove's CCNRs for landscaping and things like that. I think that'd be really interesting as a
Mhm.
community that's pretty ecologically focused.
Very guidelines,
Mhm.
maybe out of date,
Yeah.
but curious to see. Yeah.
What do you think is likely to be the most controversial part of what's in here so far? I always like to kind of head that.
Turf grass,
Mhm.
limitations and locations of turf grass.
Cool.
Um,
And that's
The-
only with like retrofitting stuff or when one of the triggers comes in, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So we're not calling that we're going to come tear your grass. There are communities in the West, Las Vegas, where they
Yep.
have grass police. We are not going that direction. But turf grass in these residential zones, that is a major water user. And if the nature of why we're being called to bring this ordinance into play is to address how and where that water is being used. And so I think there's undoubtedly benefits to turf grass. So it's that matter of, okay, we can't eliminate it altogether, nor do we want to, but we should find that boundary. And wherever that boundary lives, that's where the conflict is going to be. Somebody's going to be just over the fence. They're 1 square foot too much or 1 foot too wide. And that's where we're going to find our biggest conflict, I believe.
Is there a timing of watering provision in here? Because I feel like that might be a really good way to make some substantial change without making people change what they have.
There is,
People are
go ahead.
pretty good about it, but occasionally I'll be out biking or walking and there's a sprinkler going off at 2 p.m.
Right.
Hi.
I figured it would be better if I came over here and spoke. That was something I was actually considering putting in there, sort of similar to how Dark Skies works, that it's
Yeah.
only going to be operational between a certain time. But I think we were kind of struggling on how we wanted to enforce a lot of the rules that we were wanting to lay down, because we don't want to be too active or aggressive
Yeah.
in enforcing these things, but also, I don't know.
No, that's right on point. I think it's something that had been originally brought up, but the idea here is this is a regulatory review, a processing review and approval procedures, meaning if we're talking about metering, we're talking about active watering scheduling, that's a policing. And by policing, that's a heavy word.
Yeah.
What I mean is there's an intermediate, we issue an approval, and then if there is ever a violation, there's a huge gap in there, which is somebody is within code enforcement driving around. So we're going to enforce the code exactly, but how we police that would be different depending on our capacity as a city or our desire. So metering and alternative watering schedules are both, I think, strategies that the council is looking into, but not as a part of our landscaping code. So it'll kind of be a different arrow on the same shoot. But yeah, we want to include as much as we can here, but that begins to carve out its own different arrow at that point.
Yeah, if we create like a drought emergency plan, like maybe in a real emergency situation, we could start doing something like that.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Councilmember Jones is, thank you, Jessica. Councilmember Jones is fairly active in researching, I think, both of those options as far as zone watering. So talking about where you're at in the city, just certain neighborhoods, that's a more effective way than particular neighbors, because it would be really challenging to go neighbor by neighbor and look up.
Yeah.
But if you know, oh, this whole area is on a Tuesday schedule and you see a water on a 2 p.m. on a Wednesday, you know, oh, that's clearly not within their schedule.
Oh, I see what you're saying. I was
Um,
just thinking more some sort of prescription on, like, don't have sprinklers going off between X time and X time.
Sure.
Or I would say I would distinguish unmanned watering. I think it's different if you're like out there,
Sure.
Joe, with your hose,
Right.
you know, versus like an automated sprinkler system going off.
We should bring this up when so the consultants are going to come and meet with us when we have the draft ordinance ready
Mhm.
to address those more specifically. And I think they'd have a really, and they're watching tonight on YouTube. They'll have I think a more direct feedback on mechanisms in other communities that have done that or are starting that approach. And I don't think that we'd be opposed to that. I think there is a discussion of scope that we're trying to stay within.
Yeah,
So I
that
think we
makes
could
sense.
go that realm, but I don't think it
But I
was our
think you're right.
directive.
Even with that, I think there might be more of an enforcement component.
It would be
The
certainly.
landscaping, this is more of a, hey, we're working with the property owner to get
Right.
things into compliance, and then we back up.
Yep.
Um,
The tool that I think our consultants are using in lieu of going to that next step, which we may get to someday, if not sooner than later, is the approval criteria that irrigation design system may have components of that built in.
Yeah.
So obviously they could override these, which would be the same as you building a house and then taking a sledgehammer to the support beams after the fact. So once we've approved your design, that's what you're approved for. But if you start tweaking it or manipulating that after the fact,
Yeah.
that is a zoning violation.
Okay.
I
makes
think
sense.
that's a really good point to bring up.
Thanks for
think
the
especially with-
explanation.
As far as the overview, I'm going to stop sharing. I think that's everything that we need to share. Specifically, just having the commission keep in mind any ideas specifically with exemptions, reaching out into the community, those folks and groups of folks that you know that would be interested in this, to make sure that we're covering what we need to cover. And obviously, similar to dark sky, similar to housing, there will often always be a larger ask. They're going to say, can we regulate more? And I think the three of you as representatives will know we're going to have to strike a balance. We can't obviously ask for too much. And that's where with this particular arrow, it may get too big that it won't have a effective trajectory. And that's the balance I'm going to leave to you guys to direct us what you do truly want. And we'll fight for that at a staff level.
Yeah.
Getting it through.
I'm just like, it's first crack around, just having something that is modern, you know. And I think it's nice then that you have, it seems like this would fold in like neighborhood requirements too, like CCNRs and landscaping requirements for
Mhm.
neighborhoods where they would obviously have to be in compliance with this
Mhm.
too. So it'll help, you know, like my neighborhood was incorporated in 2001, and things are very different now than what like our landscaping standards are, which are like basically don't park on your lawn
Right.
and don't have it be junky, you know,
Right.
but there's nothing in there about grass, even though most
Right.
people have transitioned to something like that. So
Right. There were two provisions. One was a consultant ad and one was one that Jessica designed. That's kind of two sides of that same coin, which is with the state level, that a division or an HOA can't require turf grass landscaping in that way, but we're also saying they can't this was the flip side that Jessica brought up. You can't also prohibit water effective methods. They're saying, well, if we can't have turf grass, I still am not going to let you have hydrozoning or whatever it is,
Oh,
because we don't
interesting.
like that.
yeah.
So we're eliminating that option within the HOA spectrum, that this would not be interfered with jurisdictional divisions.
That makes sense. Cool.
And on that note, I think that concludes really our landscaping presentation. Any lingering questions or staff comments? Okay.
Thank you all. I know you've been working hard on this and the consultants as well who are listening.
Thank you, guys. I think future agenda items, we are going to, tonight's agenda, and this was sent out to the Plan Commission, meant to be discussing a parking exception for a site plan discussion. It's going to be a fairly intensive conversation. Working with the applicants, they've requested that we postpone because they want to strategize a bit further with staff. It's one of our downtown eating establishments looking to develop. They're wanting to develop out their property, but of course in the C3 Main Street zone, there is just no horizontal space for parking. So what we're trying to do is create a balanced approach to that parking issue. It's going to be the commission's kind of first take on what will be a precedential level approval. So whatever we're looking at here will likely be sought after immediately by a few other developers. There are some changes and recommendations staff would like to make to the code, but we may not get to that to the code rewrite. So there's going to be an interlude where we're going to be stuck, and I don't mean stuck in a negative way, but stuck with the tools that we have to use. So that's going to be a fairly extensive one that's likely to be on the 22nd.
That's good timing. I'm planning to
Or
meet with
24th,
meet
excuse
with
me.
Becky at the end of the month and circle back on parking recommendations and stuff. Now
Yep.
that she and I both have some time to maybe take a look at that because I know it's something everybody wants to look at.
Yeah.
If we can help push it along, that'd be
Right.
great. And I know it was a component of some incentives we've been doing now too.
Yep. There may be a few other site plans coming through. I have obviously the Utah State Aggie projects will be coming through. We're going to kind of continue to have pieces of that coming through to the full components done. Is there anything else, Jess or Anna, that you can think of?
Those are the ones on 200.
Common condos are in the building permit, so I think we're through.
Yeah, those are. fast.
Which one? Staybridge, which is the pre-annexed hotel south of town. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So our development review team is fairly active right now. We are in a bit of a lull where we're waiting for resubmittals, but once those resubmittals come in, some of those might be ready in the moment. Of course, once they're ready, they want to get it scheduled. So thank you all so much. I'll turn it back to Kaya. Anything else business from the commission?
No, just I wanted to take a minute just to note that, obviously it's different municipality, different jurisdictions, but we have a lot of common interest and overlap with the county as well. And there's some big things that are been moving through the County Planning Commission, our counterparts there. Then at the commission level, the County Planning Commission passed their version of an alternative dwelling overlay onto the commission, which I believe is going to be having a public hearing on the 20th at the county commission meeting on the 20th. If people are interested in that and want to engage, there's really great significant information that the chair of the County Planning Commission has made available for people who want to learn about it and sort of why this came about. And the YouTube video of the last County Planning Commission meeting, they have a really extensive discussion before passing that on to the county commission. It's so hard at the county because it's the planning commission and then the county commission.
Right.
And I like that we have a council,
Right.
I have to say. But I think that's certainly relevant if folks want to weigh in. We all live in the county, even though some of us live in the city as well. And it would essentially allow appropriate properties to have to be able to be set up for living in campers, for tiny homes, for some sort of alternative dwelling for employees for the most part. So there are a variety of properties that are employer owned where they would be able to put in the proper safety and toilets and water infrastructure to host those kinds of things. And the county's anticipating basically giving a pathway for folks to be able to do that with properties that are appropriate with significant requirements and oversight, I think, from the county, which is important. It's not just saying you can have a camper on your property tomorrow. But there are definitely some properties where it would make a big difference for housing people in short term. And I think importantly, as transitional housing, as people move here for a job and they're getting their feet under them. I think we all know it's easier to find a place in Moab once you're already in Moab. I've heard some good things from like the Contractors Roost out in the valley, where it's just specifically that kind of thing. It's a place where a lot of people land when they first get to Moab and then are able to buy a home after being here for 6 months. So just flagging that if folks are interested, there's opportunity to look into that, to weigh in if you're interested. And then I know the city could very well be looking at things that are sort of similar in our long list of possible housing solutions to try to mitigate some of the problems that we're having. We don't have the same kind of parcels in the city, but you know, it's something that certainly could be relevant down the line. So it's good to look. I like watching what others are doing and
Mhm.
learning
Mhm.
good and bad.
Mhm.
So just flagging that for anyone watching and for other commissioners. Yeah. That is it for me.
Thank you.
All right. Any other comments from staff or otherwise?
Thank you
Alrighty.
all. It's nice to be here in person.
Yeah. Thank
like
you guys
it.
for coming.
All right, I adjourn this meeting of the Moab City Planning Commission at 7:14 PM.